Okay, so I think we're going to go ahead and start now. Um, Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. And we're honored to present these initiatives to you. So yeah, we'll just start. So before we start, we'd like to remind everyone that today and every day, we exist on land that has been stolen from Indigenous peoples. White colonizers forcibly removed First Nations people through genocide, ethnic cleansing, conversion policies, and more. Colonization still exists today. It's not a thing of the past. We see how, with the coronavirus pandemic, Indigenous communities are being disproportionately impacted. It is our minimal responsibility to be actively thinking about how we can support Indigenous folks. Our country and community are both in an unprecedented time of change. To be clear, these systemic injustices that we see highlighted right now have existed since the birth of this nation. In fact, they are ingrained directly into the institutions that the United States upholds. The reason we are here to speak is because Overlake prides itself on this work. Yet we fail to see them addressing this issue in an appropriate context. This is nowhere near a temporary problem. Yes, Overlake can move on when it's convenient. The media can move on when it's convenient. But our Black community members cannot just move on from targeted police they face as a part of systemic injustice in this country. For these reasons, we felt this presentation was necessary, as we hope to offer student input and conversations that should, and will, continue on campus as we move into the school year this fall, and internally work to hold Overlake accountable for its own complacency and contribution to inequity.
We want to acknowledge that none of us are Black or African American and that we in no way intend to speak for Black people or their experiences. We also want to acknowledge that none of us face the systemic oppression that Black people in specific are subject to, and allyship always consists of listening to Black voices and following their lead. In creating this presentation, we consulted a number of socially active Black students at Overlake and prioritized their feedback to maximize an effort to speak truthfully. We've also focused on reading and learning from Black sources when writing this webinar. We've especially relied on and referenced Seattle ACLU attorney Jeffrey Robinson and his insight on American history and the myths surrounding it. And finally, we recognize that there are many Black alumni who have done amazing work in social justice, both at Overlake and since leaving. We plan to hold a follow-up discussion or webinar where we give them space to talk about their work and continue to listen and learn from them. That being said, we want to make sure that the work for equity is not simply being put onto the Black community. We recognize their pain and believe it is highly inappropriate and disrespectful to their health and privacy for us to sit back and assume social responsibility from the Black community. Finally, we want to offer a content warning. We will touch events that are painful, as one would expect from a history of white supremacy and anti-Black racism in this country. Though we limited the violence or graphic nature of images, the conversation remains traumatizing, particularly for Black students, alumni, and faculty, and we felt the need to include an opt-out. With that, we will now begin our presentation and start with a little bit about the history of white supremacy and systemic racism that we want Overlake to address.
We have been taught the myth of America instead of the reality. White supremacy looks all the way back to 1619, when the first American ship named Desire enslaved Black people, forcing them to sail across the Atlantic Ocean to be forced to work on the land of the United States of America that we live in today. Before the expansion of European imperialism and before the corruption of white supremacy that had and continues to destroy the lives of so many people all over the world, including the many lives of African people through the torturous events of the transatlantic slave trade, people in Africa lived fruitful, thriving lives with civilizations and communities they created. The identity of being a slave was imposed and forced onto Black and African people by the white imperialist men. And we fail to acknowledge and understand that people living in Africa at the time lived in advancing civilizations, kingdoms, and empires, full of knowledge and creations of new technology, including topics surrounding medicine, architecture, agriculture, and more. After years and years of ships forcing slaves to work on the lands of the United States of America, we see legislation after legislation trapping the Black community in perpetual enslavement, notably complicit to the harrowing levels of violence against Black women. In 1776, 41 of 56 Declaration of Independence signers owned enslaved people and yet signed for life and liberty. Our country's founding fathers owned humans, forcing them to work long hours each day with little rest, little food, and be abused if they tried to fight for their life, simply because of the color of their skin. The Declaration of Independence was not signed for the life and liberty of Americans, but the life and liberty for white men. White supremacy is so heavily ingrained in our country and in our Constitution. For example, in Article 1, Section 9, it states that there is no ban on migration or importation of such persons before 1800. Now, what does that exactly mean? It means that the government is not, it means that the government is allowed to force Black people into these ships and import them into America, allowing these white males to abuse and force humans to work on their fields and label them as slaves. Now, one thing that comes to mind is why is it that in my sixth grade Overlake history class, my teacher honored the Constitution, framed it on the wall, and yet we failed to look at the racist laws in the Constitution that chose to oppress Black people in this nation? Why is it that when studying the Constitution, we choose to focus our studies on the people signing it and what their names were and their lavish, privileged lives, and yet we fail to acknowledge the deep racism and oppression rooted in the Constitution?
In 1646, night patrols in Boston, also known as government-funded police, had specific jobs to look out for slaves. If slaves were found trying to escape, they would be abused, tortured, and even killed by police before being sent back to their slave owners. This is the exact same police force that has evolved into the one we have today. Therefore, it is no surprise that we continue to see police directly targeting Black folk and denying them their rights to the point of us repeatedly losing lives. Police work for the prison industrial complex to trap Black Americans into a version of modern-day slavery. Many people falsely believe that the 13th Amendment abolished slavery. In explicit contrast, the 13th Amendment actually preserved slavery in prisons. These are things that our own school's curriculum does not ensure we learn about. Not only that, Overlake has not divested its endowment from non-ESG investments such as fossil fuels and private prisons. We have enormous economic resources and financial privilege, yet our school isn't protecting those from potentially being used to fund modern-day slavery, despite the fact that over 75% of the student body is in favor of divestment.
In this present day, we continue to see Black and Hispanic communities to be targeted by the police force. As shown in this graph, a lower ratio of Black and Hispanic people sought help from the police compared to white people. And yet Black and Hispanic people are stopped by the police at a much higher rate than white people. In this graph from 2015, we see that among individuals who have any contact with the police, people of color, especially Black and Hispanic people, experience excessive physical force from the police at a much higher rate. This includes chokeholds, being thrown onto the ground, having an officer's weight fully pressed onto your body, and other physical forces. In this graph, we see that Black people face higher rates of being targeted by the police, as they face higher rates of being unfairly arrested twice in the same year compared to white people due to the police targeting and over-policing Black communities. The police targeting BIPOC communities happens all over the US and also here in our own state. This graph from 2010 from Seattle shows that the Black community is targeted by the police as the Black community faces the highest arrest ratio of 1 in 38 compared to those of white people, which is 1 in 200. Similarly, First Nations people are also targeted and face a 1 in 56 arrest ratio. This is due to over-policing in predominantly Black communities, resulting in more arrests for minor crimes. Just this year in 2020, 586 people have been killed by the police. Here are just a few images of some of the people whose lives have been taken away from the hands of the police, leaving behind their families and friends to grieve for the loss of their loved ones. Let's all please take a moment of silence for the lives murdered by police. Thank you.
The media paints their own narrative that deceives and blinds its audience from the truth behind the uprising of recent protests that we have seen all over the world. Media is quick to point towards the looting of a Target store, but outlets fail to explore the root causes, being a lack of government attention for the working class, whether that be underfunding low-income neighborhoods or a lack of social safety net during a pandemic. The harms of American capitalism are visible when we continue to exploit the working class. Peaceful protesters and police-incited violence are ignored while the looting of a Target store remains a central focus. Now, while we're talking about Target, let's talk about corporations profiting off prison labor. Prisoners work in hot, unpleasant, torturous conditions for next to nothing. Corporations work directly with our law enforcement, profiting off of and exploiting incarcerated people, depriving them of human rights. This is the modern-day slavery that is protected by the 13th Amendment. In this photo, a group of incarcerated people at Angola Prison in Louisiana work for 4 cents per hour every day. Modern-day slavery is upheld by a police force that is unfairly and unjustly targeting Black communities. We can see that the systemic oppression and upholding of white supremacy continues as we speak. From slavery to Jim Crow laws, redlining, over-policing of Black neighborhoods, mass incarceration, constant police brutality, murders and lynchings, inflated funding for the police force, underfunding of predominantly Black communities, services, and schools. These are all policies embedded into our country and its government, setting up a pattern of cyclical white supremacy. Transitioning into some modern contextualization of this historical issue, we are calling for imminent system change to actively work to undo centuries of oppression against Black, Indigenous, and people of color. The police are overfunded, especially relative to civil liberties and needs such as housing or healthcare. Cutting police funding by even as much as 50% allows us to direct funds towards helping grow communities, solving issues such as high rates of violence, crime, and drug addiction at its roots. When we fight for affordable housing, universal health care, affordable higher education, we are tackling the intersectionality of social justice. Overlake is home to clubs such as Impact, Environment, Alliance, Forefront, Future Healthcare Professionals, Girl Up, JSA, Kiva, among various others. It is important not only for those student leaders, but for faculty and adult supporters to recognize that Black Lives Matter fundamentally impacts everything these clubs fight for. Climate justice means racial justice, it means gender justice, it means Indigenous justice, it means class justice. Racism is not an individual act, racism is prejudice and power. As briefed above, modern policing originated as slave patrolling with a primary mandate to protect property and kill Black Americans. Police protect Nazis and white supremacists and frequently kill Black, brown, and queer people. We call for defunding the police and the prison industrial complex because policing is a violent, sexist, anti-Black settler institution that militarily enforces white supremacist capitalism.
We have a powerful resource today. This resource has never been so great and will fade away if we don't take advantage of it. This resource is the greatest opportunity for growth, perhaps in Overlake history. This resource is attention. More Overlake students, more than ever, are paying attention to the issues of racial justice. One look at Instagram stories will tell you that this is the 4th month where every day, every story has stayed on Black Lives Matter. Many Overlakers are watching these issues. Many are paying attention. Too few are taking action. And it'll be heartbreaking to see that attention wasted. This moment in time will not last forever. We as a community have to be armed with knowledge and facts. Institutionalized racism comes directly from the history we presented earlier. We need to tell the truth about America, and we need to understand the tipping point that we are at in this country, and recognize the imperative need for institutions and communities such as Overlake to stop repeatedly turning a blind eye to injustice. As students of this school, we're deeply underwhelmed by Overlake's response to Black Lives Matter. This response reflects privilege, decentralization to the issue, performative activism, and most disappointingly, gross satisfaction with leaving the burden of social change solely on our Black community. As students, we refuse to accept that. We refuse to waste the power and momentum of our peers' attention. Today, we'll talk about initiatives that students at Overlake are already planning and have been fighting for, and how we plan to create change with the help of you, the alumni. Right now, students are working on reforming the curriculum across departments, divesting our endowment from non-ESG companies, fundraising for COVID-19 relief and Black Lives Matter, and working with you, the alumni, for help in creating platforms to mobilize our community into continued action.
Our first initiative deals with curriculum reform. The curriculum must be reformed when the Jewish, South Asian, and Black members of the Overlake community have an issue with how their history is taught in class, and when other marginalized groups do not feel accurately represented by the curriculum. We feel that reforming the curriculum as a whole will benefit students and the Overlake community as a whole in the long run. We believe that by creating a curriculum that honors the stories of the marginalized and connects to present-day issues, Overlake will be able to achieve its mission to develop intellectual curiosity and foster a compassionate community.
Since 2018, various students have met with members of the admin, social studies, and English department teams to express concerns and feedback about their curriculum. These meetings range from formal dialogues to informal conversations after class with individual teachers. Most recently, our group of students has been working on presenting a more formal proposal to the upper school social studies faculty, requesting a, quote, less Eurocentric curriculum that focuses on the resilience of marginalized people, connects to current events and issues, and develops strong, competent thinkers, end quote. We also put together a petition that received almost 100 student signatures and asked students to tell us about their experiences with Overlake's curriculum. If you'd like to hear specific feedback or see a copy of our letter and petition, please let us know during the Q&A, and we would love to share this. We advocated for an ethnic studies framework, like the one used by Seattle Public Schools and the state of California. The Seattle Public Schools framework themes are 1, origins, identity, and agency, 2, power and oppression, 3, resistance and liberation, 4, reflection and action. Since then, we have met with each grade level team of the social studies department, so that's World History 9, World History 10, US History Honors, where we discussed testimonials and student feedback, as well as changes in the works by the teachers based on the themes we advised.
In the coming months, we're looking at setting up a dialogue with the English department to look at how they're tackling anti-racist curriculum reform, as we know they have done work in the past. We also want to meet with the white anti-racist educators affinity space to meet with faculty who want to engage with this work with us. We plan on following up with members of the social studies department at the end of first quarter to check in with them and see how their reforms are progressing. We will follow up with them to make sure surveys of student feedback include questions related to diversity and inclusion in their curriculum, and that the faculty are being held to account to progress the changes that they promise. Lastly, Mehek has collected historical data for class enrollment for a number of classes to shed light on gender disparities in enrollment that result in gender biases. We will address this data with faculty members and department chairs, as student representation in the classroom can have strong effects on how the curriculum is taught.
At the end of this webinar, we will send out a survey for you and your fellow alums to share your experience with Overlake's curriculum. We would appreciate it if you filled it out and shared it with other alums. We would love your support as it emphasizes the need for these reforms to progress.
Our second initiative deals with divesting our endowment. Currently, Overlake invests its multi-million-dollar endowment with investment firm JP Morgan into various general portfolios without filtering the companies or causes it is investing in. At the beginning of last year, the Overlake Environmental Club proposed that Overlake further pursue justice and sustainability by adopting environmental, social, and corporate governance, or ESG, standards. ESG standards are a set of criteria for mutual funds that filter out companies that do not match investor values. Without these criteria, we can't know how or where our money is being invested. Many index funds and ETFs invest not only in fossil fuels, but also in private prisons. These companies profit off of a broken criminal justice system that disproportionately targets Black and brown individuals. Not only do ESG standards better ensure that our money is not being invested counter to our values as individuals and as an institution, they have generally performed equally well or better than standard portfolios.
Last year, Environmental Club and Impact conducted a petition among the Overlake student body about whether or not the school should divest. In a survey of 80% of the student body, 98% signed in support of divestment. With help from administration, a team of students was able to meet with Overlake's financial advisors from JP Morgan. We want to make sure that even in these times of crisis, we continue to gain momentum and make progress towards divesting Overlake's endowment. Our next step is setting up a meeting with the board's investment committee, as well as creating a LinkedIn page to ease environment-focused communication between us and you all. To support Overlake divesting its endowment from a general portfolio into one that meets ESG standards, we've created an alumni-specific petition for divestment. We would greatly appreciate it if you signed it and shared it with other alumni. As mentioned, we've gathered overwhelming support from the student body and are now looking to strengthen our case with administration by supplementing it with your support.
Our third initiative has to do with fundraising. So as we all know, there are very serious societal issues in America that we have to deal with. On top of that, the current pandemic is exacerbating pre-existing racial as well as socioeconomic inequities. The hardest hit communities, both in terms of deaths and economic impacts, have typically been of color and less privileged to begin with. My fellow students have created some amazing initiatives to change the culture at Overlake to be more receptive to and aware of these issues. My initiative is a little different. Essentially, I'm creating a fundraiser which utilizes the power and popularity of soccer to raise money for organizations dealing with both pre-existing racial injustice as well as the pandemic, which, like I said, is only making the situation worse. Right now, you're probably wondering, how is this supposed to work? Basically, it's like a walkathon, but instead of walking, participants will be juggling a soccer ball. There are essentially 4 steps to follow. Step 1, participants will pledge a certain amount of money to donate per juggle, while at the end of the day, it is entirely their choice. I have recommendations based on how experienced the player is to make the decision easier. Step 2, participants will juggle a soccer ball as many times as they can consecutively without dropping it. This is where my previously mentioned recommendations come into play, so that people who don't play soccer are still able to donate a decent amount, whereas people like me who play all the time don't have to donate thousands of dollars. Step 3, donate. This is pretty self-explanatory. It's basically dollars per juggle multiplied by the juggles you did, and I'll have a GoFundMe page that people can go to. Eventually, I'll have a website that will be able to bring people to that GoFundMe page, as well as provide more information about the fundraiser and raise awareness. Step 4, spread the word. This is perhaps the most crucial step, as I need people to bring in more people in order for this to be successful. I'll have an Instagram account and potentially other social media accounts so that people can easily repost my content and potentially add how many juggles they did as a challenge for their friends. In addition, people can spread it through direct messages or word of mouth. Another reason that this step is important is because people knowing about this fundraiser raises more awareness around the issues that the fundraiser is directly combating. So in order for this to gain traction, I need an original base of people who can start spreading it. I know a lot of people in all levels of the soccer community, professional, college, youth, etc. So I will be using these contacts. This is where you guys come in. It would be amazing if you guys could become part of my original base and spread the word. I can send out the GoFundMe link, Instagram handle, and website link when they are created. And you guys just need to follow the 4 steps I outlined, especially step 4. In conclusion, this is an amazing way to get involved with fighting the pandemic and pre-existing racial injustice.
Our 4th initiative has to do with creating a social justice platform. Our goal with this initiative is to respond to the demands for a place to take action. In light of recent events, we've seen an increase in the amount of individuals within the Overlake community who are interested in pursuing social justice work. We also want to reimagine the Overlake Community Engage page, which was introduced during the pandemic, but still remains widely unused. Our initiative is to create a digital platform to promote social justice leadership opportunities and initiatives. It will be an initiative-based structure where users can post social justice leadership opportunities that other users can sign up for. You can also post support opportunities for an initiative you're leading, which other users can sign up for. This will create and make opportunities accessible for engaging the broader community in social justice work, rather than relying on the same people to continuously fight for these issues. It'll also promote inter-club initiatives as people from various clubs, as well as alumni and faculty, can come together and build coalitions to fight for Black Lives Matter, defund the police, and other relevant social issues. As Ria said, racial justice means climate justice. It means gender justice. It means indigenous justice. It means class justice. We need to make sure that our work is intersectional, and this reimagined platform hopes to truly engage all parts of the community.
At this stage in our work, we have basic plans for our platform and a basic structure of the internal code. We've also set up our GitHub. I've been focusing more on the back end using Aqueduct and PostgreSQL to set up a server to manage data and HTTP requests, while Ruja has focused more on wireframing the app and working on the user interface and user experience. The platform as currently designed will have 4 main pages: leadership, advise, support, and my tasks. The leadership opportunities page will have initiatives which students can sign up to lead, with each initiative having a description, any relevant education or training the leader would need to complete, and a brief list of subtasks to be accomplished. Before any posted opportunity is public, it will be reviewed by an administrator. Once a user signs up to lead an initiative, they will be connected with faculty and potentially an alumni advisor who will sign up through the advise page. Their tasks will also be added to the My Tasks page. The leader will be able to then post support tasks for their initiative, which will be reviewed and added to the support page.
We've designed this platform in conjunction with our Director of Diversity. We want to be able to implement this in the school community and provide it to teachers as a resource for civic engagement projects. However, we are aware that though we have experience in the computer science and in leading social justice initiatives, we are not professionals. That's why we wanted to reach out to you and to the broader alumni community. We love your feedback in the design process of this app and potentially in creating it. The backend HTTP server is currently running, and we plan to continue integrating the client app into it in the next few weeks.
If you're interested in discussing the function of the app or helping us create it, we plan to create a Discord server for working on the app. We would love to work with anyone who has computer science, project management, social media, or social justice experience, as those are areas in which we are not experts. If you're interested, we will be sending out a link to join the Discord server, and we'll schedule an initial meeting to discuss the app's design and code structure on Discord. And I want to take this opportunity to introduce Trey and Gaia, who will be talking about their initiatives.
Thank you guys. That was a
thank you.
You can go ahead.
Yeah, that was an amazing presentation, and it's great to hear that you guys are doing so much work. My name is Gaia. I use he, him, his pronouns. I graduated in 2019, and I'm currently a rising sophomore at Pitzer College.
Yeah, and I'm Trey. I use he, him, his pronouns as well. I graduated same year as Gaia, and I'm a rising sophomore at Washington University in St. Louis.
Right. So, kind of with all the things going on, Trey and I and two other members, two other leaders decided to create a group called the East Side Change Coalition, with kind of the goal of giving youth activists a platform to share their passion for change. So I'm just going to quickly read our mission statement. As youth activists, we will unite together to reimagine, recreate, and restructure the current systems of power that oppress and abuse Black and brown bodies. We will create a network of resources to allow for the facilitation of robust education on institutional systems of oppression for all who are looking to learn. We are the next generation, and together we will change the world. And so with all that, we decided to come together to kind of like fill up the space of youth activists on the East Side, because we noticed that there really wasn't a strong coalition that's really been fighting for that. Yeah.
Yeah, adding on to that a little bit about, for everyone who's on the call, how you can help Eastside Change Coalition. So as Guy mentioned, we have a social media, Instagram and Twitter, and all of our educational resources, all of our events, all of our policy and demands that we're presenting, all of that is funneled through the social media platforms. So if you're interested in being involved with some of the work we're doing on the East Side, the first step really is to try and follow us on one of those. I'll send the social media handles in the chat right after this. Additionally, we do have some upcoming events in the next few weeks, one of which is we're trying to lead a series of online classes that would show what a decolonized curriculum would look like, which sounds like it was brought up in you all's initiative. We have some educators in the Seattle area that are helping us out with that, leading classes and teaching lessons where the BIPOC diaspora is at the centerpiece. In addition to that, we're also hosting a space for leaders in the three main Eastside communities, that is Bellevue, Kirkland, and Redmond. The leaders, for example, the superintendent of Lake Washington, the mayor of each of these cities, chief of police of each of these cities, and council members. We're sharing a space with them to have a discussion about what they're doing to promote Black Lives Matter agenda and tangibly what they're doing to support what's going on. Again, more information for that can be found on our social media. Also, Mehek, I, and Guy have been in discussion. We're just one group of alumni students who are joining the social justice scene. There are other alumni who are also on the social justice scene, of course, and we are discussing creating a webinar for all alumni who are doing social justice work to connect with each other and share resources, share what they're doing so that we can all help each other out, just as a heads up for that. In conclusion, I know you guys have Q&A after this. I just want to say, like, I love the work you guys are doing. Overlake is a very sleepy community, as you know, and sometimes promoting this social justice work in a sleepy and apathetic community can be the hardest battle sometimes. And I'm glad that, you know, as you guys said, it isn't just relying on Black bodies to be always at the forefront of trying to melt away the apathy. So I'm just glad that you guys are organizing and doing this work. And that's all we have to say.
Thank you so much to Trey and Gaia. The information for the alumni social justice event will hopefully be going out in the next week. We're still in discussion and planning the logistics of it, but we're really looking forward to continuing this conversation between alumni and students. So thank you all for listening and giving us your attention. We'll now open for questions. So if you have a question, please type it into the public chat along with who the question is meant for, if it's directed to one of us specifically. Ruta, our moderator, will be reading the questions out to all of us.
Yeah, so Christian mentioned that he'd like to share the recording with the entire alum community after this. We are planning on posting this on Facebook in some way. I personally don't have Facebook, so Mehek will be responsible for that. So yeah, so you will all be able to look back at this, and we'll be sending out resources as well. So our first question comes from Kristen Kramer, and it says, who or what do you view as your main obstacle to achieving some or all of your goals? Would any of you like to take that question?
I can answer that first, and I think each of us probably have our own individual answers that relate to our initiatives. So maybe one person from each initiative can answer. Personally, in terms of divestment, and Rio can speak to this as well, I think that we've been fortunate in getting a good amount of administrative support for our initiative, but I think the main obstacle really is momentum. Especially with COVID-19, the administration has been very busy and hard to reach as of late. And so continuing that conversation has been hard. And Ria, you can speak on that as well.
I think that just generally, given every initiative, kind of like what Trey was saying, it's difficult to keep the conversations going. I mean, it's easy for the school and administration to say they support us, but to the point where the conversations are moving at a very slow pace and we're not seeing impacts materialize, that's the biggest challenge, in my opinion.
Adding on to what Ria said, I think just a lot of the time we get unfulfilled or empty-hearted, I guess, answers. So it's like, yeah, we support you, but we're not changing anything. So it's a very slow process. And in general, that's just a large obstacle we need to tackle somehow.
So I think we should move on to the next question, which is, when do you plan to present these initiatives to the Overlake administration, and how will you hold them accountable to fulfilling your demands? And then, so first of all, I'm going to say there's a question coming up later about the curriculum reform, so we'll answer that element of the question in that section later. However, the other groups, would you guys like to go ahead and answer when you want to present these and how you'll hold them accountable to these demands?
I can speak a little bit about the curriculum that Angela was leading. Oh, sorry if you guys hear my brother, he's like screaming in the back. But so we had a meeting, or we had a bunch of meetings with each social study department grade level. So we had a meeting with the 9th grade social studies teachers, 10th grade, so forth. I think Angela or Rita might have mentioned that earlier. So we talked to them about our proposal for a more ethnic studies curriculum, and we're going to continue to have meetings, hopefully quarterly throughout the school year, to continue to hold our teachers accountable and make sure they're making concrete changes in their curriculum.
And I can speak to that a little bit more too. I know that the social studies team, they haven't made any like definitive like time decisions on like, oh, when exactly we're going to like implement. Well, I know they're changing some of their units for the forthcoming school year, but I don't think they want to make any promises, especially because of COVID and how everything's sort of up in the air. But like Hans said, we are definitely going to keep meeting with them and in the future, hopefully other departments to just have that constant sort of push. And so we keep pushing them to just know that they have to keep thinking about it, that they can't just forget about it one day, and how important it is for us and just the greater community to just keep going.
And in terms of also continuing to present our continued work in these initiatives, we're also hoping to present a similar webinar to this at one of the faculty and service days this year. We've not gotten a response from the administration, but we will certainly keep pushing for that to happen, because I think it's really important for the faculty to be aware of what our needs are in terms of curriculum and in terms of just general social justice work.
Yes, definitely. So Mahak, the next question is for you. So it was mentioned that you had data on gender bias in our curriculum. Is this open for everyone to see or just for the faculty?
Yeah, so I've been asking Elisa Steinhilber, our registrar, for gender data. Over the past few years, some years I've been able to receive that and some I have not. I am waiting on this year's enrollment data just because, we're still in that sort of add drop period where nobody really knows what classes they're taking. But I hope to this year work with the curriculum committee to find a way to present that data in a way that is a little more curated and a little bit more explanatory about causes and goals on how we can start to shift that data. But certainly one of my goals is to publish it in some form. Whether or not the administration will necessarily approve that remains to be seen.
Yes, definitely. We're still waiting on some of that. So the next question is, have you received any commitments from the school regarding a timeline for updating curriculum and what they teach? So I'll just go ahead and answer this one, since I've also been working on the curriculum reform aspect of this. So as we mentioned, we met with each of the departments and we were able to present a list of issues that we had with specific elements of the curriculum. So each of the departments has committed to remove a good portion of those elements and at least change the way that new topics will be presented to avoid highlighting history from the viewpoint of just the oppressors, which I think is a step in the right direction. And as we mentioned, our next goal is to hold them accountable, but with quarterly check-ins, as well as moving this focus to other departments as well.
And I guess really quickly, I'm just gonna, I think, because I don't know if any of us quite addressed the whole ethnic studies thing. The social studies department has not committed to including an ethnic studies curriculum, one, because of the times we're in right now with COVID and just everything's chaotic. And then also just the fact that, at least the way we were pushing it, was we said we'd like a full year required course. And if they were to change the freshman course to an ethnic, from what it is currently, which is like ancient and medieval history, to ethnic studies, it would require like full department discussion, and then I think maybe even admin approval. Like there are like multiple steps to go through, and it's probably not going to happen until like we're alumni. So we'll see what happens, and if we can, we'll try and keep everybody updated.
And also, I'll add one more thing for the curriculum. Like one specific example change I noticed for the 10th grade history class, we learned about Napoleon and like, Napoleon's reign, a very Eurocentric unit. And so they fully took that out of the curriculum and are replacing it with other units. I forget which specific ones, but they're definitely making some changes, but we'll see if that really follows through and stuff.
So our next question is, have you faced any pushback from Overlake parents? If so, how do you deal with that? So I guess from a curriculum reform perspective, we have not fully these discussions have been between us and the faculty, as well as a couple interested students who've provided testimonials. We haven't really involved parents in the process. In terms of pushback in general, I mean, parents will complain about anything, but I think overall we've received a lot of positive feedback from the Overlake community in general, and I can only hope our parents will reflect on that.
And also, for all you alumni, keep putting pressure on Overlake to try and create these changes, because those comments in that Facebook post or something, I remember there's a bunch of alumni comments expressing their issues about Overlake, and that helped a lot. So continue to do that, please.
Definitely. So we really want to make sure that our initiatives, we really benefit from transparency and putting public pressure on Overlake, because it's a lot easier for Overlake faculty and administrators to say no to a group of students inside an office privately, versus it's much harder to say no to a group of alumni or a group of students or a group of parents pushing publicly on social media for these changes, and harder to fight against public support.
So the next question kind of builds off of this, and I'd like to direct this specifically to, I think, Mehek and Angela. Correct me if I'm wrong. You guys are on the student interview committee.
Yeah, I can speak to this
one. It says, are there any initiatives on diversifying the faculty, especially within social studies and history classes?
Okay, so I'm really happy who asked that. Was that Gaia? Thanks for asking that. That's a really great question. I know I've spent the past year doing quite a few interviews, and I know, especially with social studies teachers, it's not necessarily focusing on like the race of the individual, although sometimes there's like correlation between, for example, like their expertise, like say, do these candidates have experience like teaching non-Western history specifically? And oftentimes I've found there's a correlation between race and that expertise. So I think, since, as many of you probably know, legally speaking, we can't like ask what person's race, or like specifically say race will be a factor that we use to hire someone. But I think definitely there are ways to kind of get around that. And because I know that, yes, there are a lot of times BIPOC and just POC candidates in general have the expertise and life experience that will just sort of that will diversify and enrich the curriculum and the student experience. So it's definitely something we've pushed for. And I will say, we did hire a South Asian, the new social studies teachers. The new social studies teacher who replaced Bob Bristol is South Asian, and the new assistant upper school head who replaced Megan Waddle is also South Asian. So and I don't know if anybody can speak to any of the other new hired people, but there is definitely more representation. We're getting there. And I guess I can also speak to this. This is unrelated to any of the initiatives that we've presented here, but last year at the People of Color Conference, I did bring up hiring with the large group of faculty that were there. And I said how important it is for just the student experience to have more faculty of color, especially because I believe that over like, I don't know, maybe Mata or Christian or someone who actually has the actual data can correct me, but I believe that like 85% or even higher than that, something crazy, faculty at Overlake are white. So we definitely do need more diversity. And I think there are ways that we can use other sort of skill sets from the candidates to diversify our faculty.
Definitely. Just to briefly follow up on that, I've also been on student interview committees since my freshman year. So I've been interviewing candidates for 4 years now. And especially in my freshman year, which, Angela, I'm sorry, you were a middle schooler then. Especially in my freshman year, the reason I got into it was we were really pushing to increase faculty of color in the upper school. I believe in my freshman year, it was under 5 faculty of color, and most of them were from the world languages department. But we've since tried to increase that. We've also seen issues in keeping faculty of color, with a higher rate of us losing faculty of color and faculty with diverse backgrounds. But yeah, it was definitely a pleasure to hire the first ever South Asian administrator this year, considering our school is so heavily South Asian. It's been a pleasure to hire our first ever female CS teacher, who's also our first ever Black CS teacher this year. And I really think there is a correlation, even in STEM classes, between the kind of people we have teaching our classes and the enrollment we see. We've seen that, in physics, even in math to an extent, in CS, we've had mainly white male teachers. And starting to disrupt, and we've also seen that in those classes, they are the most disproportionately male, with, I believe, physics, math, and CS averaging 30% female to 30% female to 70% male. And I think that diversifying the people who teach it, the image of the expert, will really help that.
Yeah, so kind of going off of that a little bit more, has there been any more talk about increasing diversity and representation in STEM classes at Overlake? I know, Mahek, you've done a little bit of work on this, and we've discussed this very broadly in our curriculum reform meetings. I guess just to quickly give a quick summary of some of the things we're looking for, is we're trying to be able to implement first of all, more diverse perspectives in STEM, such as highlighting the accomplishments of people of color in STEM fields. And I think Mehak has some information, a little bit more on student representation as well.
Yeah, as I mentioned in my last answer, it is astonishing how much it follows the stereotype, but in our physical sciences classes versus our life sciences classes, you can see a huge difference in enrollment. So for example, biology, environmental science, and chemistry to an extent are 50-50 or even 55-45 favoring females, whereas physics, math, and computer science consistently, as the levels get higher, there's more and more of a skew towards mostly male students and a few female students, to the point where in classes that are at the highest level, such as Calc BC, such as and Calc AB, AP Physics, and post AP CS, whether data structures or app development, we can see classes where there's 1 girl to 5 or 6 guys, making the overall percentages for those subjects, specifically elective courses, around 30% female to 70% male. And that's definitely going to be a focus. That's definitely something that's very relevant to me and to Ruta as well, since I know we're both, we've been in the CS and STEM space for years now. I think that also definitely working with the curriculum committee to see where we can integrate a more diverse viewpoint of these physical sciences and math and CS. How do we get girls into it? I think the teachers are definitely a factor. I think the perspectives we highlight, like beyond, the white male scientist. And I think that even it goes back to 6th grade when we're first put into algebra, like 1 year or 2 year, that can impact the rest of your math career. And we're seeing, I know in my year, there were double the guys than there were girls put into the faster math track.
So given that it's 2:00 now, I think with that, we can conclude our presentation. If any of you have any additional questions, our emails are on the screen, and I think we have a few closing remarks from Mehek.
Definitely. Thank you all so much for coming. Before we just end this Zoom call, we do have a resource document, which I believe Ria is going to put the link into the chat. And this has the links to all the different petitions. It'll have a link to a transcript of this talk and to the PowerPoint, and other information on the individual initiatives and on Black Lives Matter in general. We are also planning to post this on Facebook, email it out, get it out on social media. But in general, I just want to say that this is a powerful community. Together, we can use our individual skills to move our beloved but sometimes sleepy school and our broader community towards diversity, equity, and inclusion. So thank you so much.
Thanks, you guys. You guys are amazing. Really, this is terrific. Look forward to working with you this year.
Bravo.